Well, good morning once again. My name is Patrick Vanier. For those of you who have arrived today, I supervise the narcotics prosecution team with the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. I want to welcome you to day 2 of the Silicon Valley Marijuana Awareness Conference. We had a dynamic group of speakers yesterday. I think it was a phenomenal day. Received a lot of positive feedback from the amazing group of speakers that came from all over the country. And we have an equally amazing group of speakers with some very informative topics and information that they've come to present to you today. So, similar to yesterday, we're going to be following a similar structure. We have a very choreographed agenda that's been laid out. We have it choreographed down to the minute, and we're hoping to stay on schedule. In order to keep the conference moving on time, we've provided biographies for the speakers. We're going to keep the introduction short. So please look at your folders, and if you can become acquainted with their biographies and some of the amazing work that they've done that's outlined in the biographies, it will certainly help in them going right to the data and the information that they've come here to present. If for some reason you don't have your folder from yesterday and there were a few folders left on the tables, I believe we have extras at the registration table. Please check with staff and they can provide you with another copy of the brochures and informational material for the conference. We will also be following the same procedure as yesterday as it relates to answering questions, and that's for purposes of keeping the conference on time. So if at any point in time during the presentation you have a question, we will have ushers that will be available. Just hold the cards up. They'll come and pick up the index cards. Please write your question as legibly as you can. I had difficulty reading a few yesterday, but we really want to answer your questions. And if we can't get to the questions in the allotted time that we've allocated for the speakers, then we will most definitely post your question and an answer from the presenter on the Eventbrite site. There will be cards. If you don't have them on your table, we'll make sure we get some. Just hold up your hand. Someone will come over there. So our break, we only have one break today. We'll have a 15-minute break towards the end of the morning. We will be providing a light lunch during that period of time. It will be in a similar fashion as yesterday too. You'll be very self-contained. You can just pick it up, bring it back to your seat, and then at the conclusion of the 15-minute break, we will resume with the next presenter. And at that point, it'll be the only break of the day, and we will continue to the end of the conference. So I encourage you to stay to the end of the conference too. Our last couple speakers of the day, actually, well, 3 speakers after the break. We have Jim Gerhardt from Colorado Drug Investigators Association. It's hard to say this early in the morning. We have Chelsea Clark from Rocky Mountain HIDA, and we have John Redmond from California HIDA. And they all have some important information to present, and I think it'll be very informative if you stay. So we're going to continue on now with the presentations. Kind of a continuation from yesterday's presentation on the rural land use issues of marijuana and the manufacturing of concentrated cannabis. There exists a host of urban issues as it relates to the retail sale of marijuana, as well as the dispensing of edibles and concentrated cannabis. And we put together a very dynamic group of presenters for this panel, the Urban Use Panel. We have today, and many of these panelists are here from Santa Clara County, and they're dealing with the issues pertaining to marijuana within Santa Clara County, as well as in our neighboring counties of Santa Clara. So we're very fortunate to have these speakers, and I'd like to invite them up on stage right now. We have public safety lobbyist Tim Cromartie from the League of California Cities to speak on behalf of the cities. We'll then have Sergeant Dave Woolsey, who's responsible for the implementation and compliance for the City of San Jose's marijuana dispensary program. Next, we'll have Lieutenant Larry Ryan with San Jose Police Department, who's in charge of the street enforcement teams, and then he'll be addressing some of the black market cultivation issues in the sale of marijuana. Then we'll have Deputy District Attorney Edward Liang with the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. He works on my team, and he's been on the front line dealing with and prosecuting marijuana dispensaries and the black market retail sale of marijuana. And lastly, we'll have a representative, an investigator actually, from Pacific Gas and Electric, Michael Truex. And he's here today to describe to you the issues of power theft and the dangers to the community and the impact to consumers when individuals do indoor marijuana grows and steal power from the electrical grid. So we have just a tremendous group of presenters on this panel. And at this time, I'd like to turn the podium over to public safety lobbyist Tim Cromartie from the League of California Cities to talk about marijuana issues from the city's perspective. Mr. Cromartie.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? I am going to base my remarks on what I call a brief local regulatory checklist that I put together after getting several questions over many months from a number of local elected officials. Basically, it's what cities need to know if they are considering regulating or even banning marijuana. And although I'm definitely not here as an advocate on Prop 64 one way or the other, I will touch briefly on what local governments need to know about how your regulatory world will change if the Adult Use of Marijuana Act should pass. First, any city considering adoption of a local regulatory ordinance for medical marijuana should take a look at Oakland's ordinance, which is one of the most comprehensive. The League of Cities, by the way, has on our website a series of ordinances. There are links that go to the actual ordinance for the cities involved, and it's a host of approaches from bans, outright bans, to allowing dispensaries but banning cultivation, allowing cultivation but banning dispensaries, testing facilities, etc. So I would encourage you all to visit that site. If you need guidance to it, I will leave my information with Patrick and Dr. Nelson. They will be able to put you in touch with me, and I can direct you to the appropriate place on our website. But Oakland, again, had a very strategic, comprehensive approach. One of the things they did early on is they decided to adopt a per capita formula for how many dispensaries they would ultimately have. That was very smart and strategic because it did a couple of things right out of the gate. Number one, it automatically limited the regulatory burden on the city. They would never have an explosion of businesses because it was linked to their population. So unless they had a sudden population explosion, you're not going to have what they had in the Denver metropolitan area in Colorado, which is just an explosion of businesses where they're as prevalent as Starbucks. The other thing it does is it limits it makes the only way to keep a handle on the businesses much easier, because until the federal government reschedules the drug, it's going to be an all-cash business. So it's going to be worse than trying to regulate even a liquor store. Liquor stores can legally accept other forms of payment. If you're dealing with an all-cash business, you must have a rigorous protocol for audits. Audits are the only way to keep a handle on the volume of traffic, the amount of revenue that's changing hands, and if you have a local tax, it is the only way to be sure you are getting your reasonable fair share of the revenue from that tax that you anticipated. Regulatory fees. A local regulatory fee must be established at the outset, a local licensing fee. Licensing fees, if they're going to be effective, should be geared to what the city anticipates will be its regulatory cost to regulate one business for 1 year. That basically means everything from audits to law enforcement responses to issues with having code enforcement come out, other inspectors under the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act enacted last year. The primary entity that will do inspections is going to be either the local code enforcement department or some other locally designated entity. We left that up to the local governments, but it can be code enforcement. Very often, a lot of communities are going to want law enforcement to accompany whoever goes into these dispensaries for inspections, whether it's compliance checks on how they're handling the merchandise, do they have the cash securely situated, is there appropriate lighting, is there appropriate security as you enter the business, etc. So that regulatory fee is very important. The City of Oakland has an annual business license fee of $60,000 per business per year. And they can justify and document that based on, here's how we broke it out. They've got line items for everything among the things I listed. Audits, law enforcement response times, the city treasurer's efforts to collect tax. The other important issue is because these are all cash businesses, it's very important to set up a protocol for accepting large cash payments. And you will probably have to arrange for an armored car company, because it's that kind of cash that these folks, if you've got somebody carrying a couple of briefcases with $60,000 a piece in them, they're liable to be robbed or mugged if they don't have appropriate security. So the city needs to coordinate that with local businesses if you're going to allow these things in your community. Oakland, again, was really smart on that. The other thing I would absolutely urge is if you are considering allowing these businesses, you absolutely must have local law enforcement input. You need to sit down with your police chief, public safety officials, and explain what you're contemplating, get their feedback, and see try to gauge what their comfort level is for what you anticipate, whether it's you want 10 dispensaries, or you want dispensaries in cultivation, you want to allow testing facilities, or manufacturing. Manufacturing is particularly problematic. There's a recent law that's on the governor's, it's not a law yet, it's on the governor's desk right now that will address manufacturing. I'll touch on that in a moment. In my experience, and I work closely with the Police Chiefs Association in Sacramento, law enforcement tends to advise against the following: mobile dispensaries or delivery services, because it is much more difficult to track their movements and activities. In my interactions, law enforcement, the first thing they may be, and pardon me, I don't mean to step on toes, they may urge you don't do this because it's going to lead to some regulatory headaches that you probably haven't thought through and don't want. But they tend to prefer brick and mortar establishments as opposed to anything that is mobile. If your city opts to allow delivery services, they should be under the ownership and control of the dispensary as is currently required under medical marijuana regulation and safety. Local taxes. Local taxes on medical marijuana should definitely be conservative to start with. The reason is a lot of jurisdictions, quite frankly, get greedy. They think this is going to be a cash cow. They run out with a 10 or 15% tax. All that does is stimulate black market activity. You are not going to get the anticipated revenue. Your tax is that high. The approach that the league recommends, if you're going to do this, and we're not urging it to be done at all, but if you are going to do it, then start out conservative with a tax somewhere between 2 to 5%. Because if you stimulate black market activity, you won't get the revenue. You've got a lot more illicit, unlicensed activity out there, and it's going to be more of a problem for law enforcement. You're certainly going to be hearing about it at city council meetings or city county planning commission meetings. Some jurisdictions, depending in part on where they're located and their proximity to other cities, where medical marijuana is available, have local taxes as high as 10%. That's usually because they're the only one in a county or a region. And again, too high a tax is just going to stimulate folks to go to more traditional illicit sources. That is going to be counterproductive. Cities that opt to regulate medical marijuana or non-medical marijuana should have a procedure in place, again, for accepting all cash payments. Now, the facilities that can be allowed are cultivation, dispensing, manufacturing, testing, and transport. I mentioned a minute ago that there's a law on the governor's desk that will clarify the law on manufacturing. The act that was passed last year clearly contemplates manufacturing activities, including some form of extraction. One of the most effective forms of extraction is butane extraction, but California law currently is very clear that butane extraction is out now illegal. Therefore, a lot of cities have been very gun-shy about pardon me, authorizing manufacturing facilities at all. They shouldn't touch them. Other cities have said, well, we'll authorize a manufacturing facility, but you have to be clear that the only thing we're going to authorize is carbon dioxide extraction. Even in that instance, law enforcement has moved in and promptly shut those facilities down because from their point of view, it's extraction. There's a bill that will clarify what can and can't be done. It will put rules in place, and this is an interim rule until the state licensing entities begin issuing manufacturing licenses and there are state regulations in place. But for now, it's been revealed to us that the food services industry does butane extraction all the time under federal food and drug safety standards and standards that comply with underwriter laboratories and a number of other standards. That bill specifies that you must have the approval of a local fire services official. It's got to be a closed loop system which captures any gas. In other words, it's going to be, in terms of gas is escaping. It's as self-contained as it can be. This language was developed by the League of Cities and the California Police Chiefs in partnership with the marijuana elements of the marijuana industry. We vetted it with the California Fire Chiefs Association. They indicated that they were at least neutral on it, and on that basis, both the Police Chiefs Association and the League of Cities supported this language. And again, it's meant to be an interim regulation governing extraction until such time as state regulations are in place. So if the governor signs that, then even butane extraction under circumstances that are specified in this piece of legislation, AB 2679 by Assemblywoman Cooley, they will be allowed to proceed, and cities can authorize these types of facilities with some degree of confidence that they won't be shut down. But the requirements are rigorous. They've got to be complied with, and we'll have to see how it goes. We try to write it as tightly as we could. We've had, although the Fire Chiefs Association indicated that it's neutral, the League has an independent Fire Chiefs Department, and their leadership has indicated they like that language to be even tighter, so we will be investigating cleanup language to tighten those standards even further. Testing facilities are extremely important under the regulatory structure because they, right now, or prior to the medical marijuana regulation, the Safety Act being enacted last year, there were absolutely no standards in place for edibles, no standards of any kind. Edibles are the fastest growing part of the market. The demographic right now is that kids 20 and under are more likely to reach for edibles than they are for a marijuana cigarette or a doobie. Their parents are going to want the cigarette, perhaps, because that's what they're accustomed to. But for kids, the most attractive part of this market is the edibles. The edibles have been, until very recently, completely unregulated. They're very dangerous because we don't know what's in them. There's no rules on maximum concentration, etc. And there have been some unfortunate incidents of drug driving. In one case, a kid was on spring break. He went into a dispensary, bought an edible. They may or may not, it was a cookie, a chocolate chip cookie. They may not have told him that, you should only eat 1/6 of this cookie and then wait a couple of hours once you know how it's going to affect you. But what does he do? It's like you walk into Mrs. Fields. He does what most of us would do. He greedily eats the whole cookie at one sitting. And he became very violent. He started hallucinating. He was in a hotel room with his friends. He got violent, started breaking up furniture. His buddies tried to restrain him. He fought them off and ultimately jumped out a window to his death. So that's why we desperately need a regulation of these edibles. The testing labs are there to test for purity of both the finished product and also for potency issues. And if you have a testing facility, be aware that the current law is that testing facilities cannot be associated with any other licensed activity under the Act. Nor is it possible under California law for a testing facility to be owned and operated. If the owner of the testing facility is involved in any other aspect of this traffic, then there's a problem, there's a violation of the law. Because there's supposed to be a firewall around testing. It's supposed to be sacrosanct and a solo activity. It's that important, and we thought it couldn't be even the appearance of impropriety or conflict of interest if folks are involved in the testing. Lastly, I will turn briefly to what local governments need to know if the Adult Use of Marijuana Act should pass. Number one, local bans on indoor cultivation will no longer be allowed. Cities will be able to or local governments will be able to reasonably regulate, but absolutely cannot ban indoor cultivation. We have anecdotal evidence from Colorado that has made it virtually impossible to keep marijuana out of the hands of minors. So just something to be aware of. Cities can require, in terms of what your regulations would be, they can require cultivation permits and charge a fee for that. They can require inspections if they're willing to undertake that activity. To ensure that cultivation is compliant with things like the fire code, not using excessive water or electricity. The city of Arcata up north had a huge problem with indoor cultivation. They had to work with PG&E for several years to, number one, get the utility to cooperate with them when they realized that there were spikes in energy use, and get the utility to pinpoint that spike in energy use is due to activity at the following addresses. It took quite a while, cost the city quite a bit of money, but those are the things that cities are going to have to cope with going forward. The AUMA provides that state licenses can't be issued where the activity will be in violation of local ordinance. So on paper, it looks like it protects local control. However, if the initiative should pass in November, cities should be aware that if you do not have an ordinance or other regulation explicitly referencing non-medical marijuana, then your local regulatory structure will be deemed to be silent on non-medical marijuana businesses, and under those circumstances, the state can unilaterally issue a license without a permit. So if you currently have an ordinance on the books, carefully check its wording. If it references medical marijuana, it is not going to cover non-medical marijuana if the initiative should pass, and you will have an ordinance or a local regulatory protocol in place that is silent on non-medical or recreational marijuana. And you will need to amend that ordinance prior to the time that the state begins licensing under the AUMA, which is anticipated to be January 2018, possibly late 2017. And again, cities whose ordinances reference medical marijuana only will be at risk of having the state independently making licensing decisions on new businesses in your district until and unless your ordinance is updated to reference non-medical marijuana. Now, other general issues of concern related to the initiative, if it should pass, one I've already mentioned is increased access by minors. The AUMA provides, secondly, that local governments can reasonably regulate. That is, other than it requiring some preliminary things like a permit and charging a fee for the permit, there's going to be a quantum leap in the regulatory burden on the city if you try to regulate beyond that. Just be aware of that. And you want to think through carefully how you want to do it. But it is going to be important probably to make sure that if you care, that people are actually cultivating no more than the limit for personal cultivation, which is 6 plants. It can be indoors or it can be in an outdoor greenhouse if that greenhouse is self-contained and if it is not visible from a public space, but no more than 6 plants. But in terms of spikes in water use and energy use, those are the things you're going to be concerned about and anticipate, in compliance with the fire code, you want to anticipate possibly undertaking some inspections. Potential preemption of local taxes. The initiative calls for a 15% tax on medical and non-medical marijuana. There was a bill going through the legislature this year that the league was very much in opposition to that would also have imposed a 15% tax. We opposed that because we said it was too high. It would stimulate black market activity, and from our perspective, more importantly, for local governments, it would literally muscle us out of being able to enact a local tax and expect to get any revenue. Because if you're already paying a 15% tax at the state level, then if you've got a local tax of between 2 to 5%, people are going to think twice before they buy it legally. They're going to think hard about going to the illicit market where they can cut some of their costs. That is my presentation. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to segue into, Now we're going to segue into looking at it from a Santa Clara County perspective, and specifically the city of San Jose. We have Sergeant Dave Woolsey, who's in charge of the medical marijuana compliance and enforcement unit with the San Jose Police Department. He's been responsible since 2014 to implement the city of San Jose's codes that were implemented to regulate the medical marijuana dispensaries. He's going to provide you a historical overview of why these particular city codes were necessary and ultimately the impact that it's had on the city of San Jose. So I'd like to welcome Sergeant Dave Woolsey.
I'm going to cheat because I need to see my PowerPoint here so I can keep up with the right slides. Thank you, Patrick, for having me. I'm happy to be here. And I'll try to address some of the things that aren't in the slides with what my colleague just talked about, because some of the issues definitely, there's some overlap. So to talk about the history of our ordinance, prior to 2014, the middle of 2014, pretty much from 2010 or 2011 through that time, there were no regulations in place in San Jose. There were no regulations at the state. Medical marijuana collectives could pretty much do whatever they want, and in San Jose they did. At one time there were over 120, up to 120 collectives. That number fluctuated between 90, 110, 120, would kind of go up and down as businesses kind of came and went. And because they were completely unregulated, the community and the city council decided that we needed to pass some kind of regulations to address those collectives, to bring them into some kind of compliance. So in June of 2014, they passed 2 ordinances. Title 20, which is a local land use ordinance that prescribed where collectives can operate. There are 2 components to that. One is just the zoning district that they can be in. For example, it's predominantly industrial, light industrial, heavy industrial. Those are the kinds of areas that they can be in. And we also have buffers around sensitive uses. For example, you can't have a collective within 1,000 feet of a school or a park. You can't have a collective within 150 feet of a residential property. You can't have a collective within 500 feet of a substance abuse rehabilitation center, and you can't have a collective within 50 feet of another collective. There was a lot of debate on those numbers, where those numbers started out and where they ended up, and how you measure those. They're important. 50 feet between collectives is a little on the low end. I mean, you can throw a rock and hit the next collective, so that can be a problem. And I talked to some people in San Francisco and I asked them, if you could change one thing, if you could go back in time and change one thing about your ordinance, what would it be? And that was the one thing that the guy would change. Because there they've been squished into so many, such a small area that they'll have 2 or 3 collectives on the same block, and then you have a lot of arguments erupting between collectives, trying to shuttle customers from one collective to another, and that just created a lot of problems. So 50 feet is on the low end, but that's where we're at in San Jose. There was originally a 90-day window for people to apply, and I'll get into how many applied in just a moment. But it took about a year to a year and a half before we actually, after the ordinance was passed, had everybody in compliance, so to speak, from the standpoint of they were completely registered with the city, they met all of our requirements, they had been inspected multiple times. And while we only had 50 apply out of the 90 or so at the time the ordinance passed, which was down from the 100 or so, there were when we were unregulated, through the process of regulating them and setting certain standards and certain markers that they had to meet, only 16 were successfully registered. Our application window is closed, so we aren't accepting new applications. We're stuck at the number 16, but we didn't, like Oakland, set a number based on a per capita. We didn't do that. There was talk about doing that originally when council was considering the ordinance, but at the end of the day, only 16 made it, and that's where we're at in San Jose, and that's where we're probably going to be for a considerable amount of time unless council opens the window for new applications. Because we're only at 16, that means there were another 70 or so that were closed through either administrative action, letters sent to the property owners. The property owners tend to be a good place to find leverage when you're trying to close a business, because if the property owner has to pay a lot of fines or could lose their property, they tend to not want to do that, and so they'll generally evict their tenant if they can. But you have to be careful, because if the tenant's throwing a lot of cash their way, they might be willing to fight you and take you to court and string out the civil process, which is the next step in San Jose's efforts to close collectives. We took a lot of collectives to court, obtained civil injunctions against them, and ultimately we ended up doing some criminal actions against some of these people. Some of our key regulations: no one under 21 is allowed on the property. All marijuana has to be dispensed in child-resistant oblique packaging. We background check all of our employees. They can't have a conviction for a violent offense within 10 years, fraud, force, fear, deception, or even a drug offense. We have video surveillance access to all of the collectives 24/7. They keep records of all the transactions and all the cultivation for 5 years, no on-site consumption. We have zoning and sensitive receptors. And we do require audits. We have an annual audit that's required that they submit to, and then that's compared to the numbers that they provide our finance department. The big number that we talk about is taxes. That's what every community wants to look at. How much am I going to get in taxes? Since the MBT, the marijuana business tax, was passed in 2011, the number for San Jose is $29 million. That's how much our city has gotten in that about 5-year period now. But there are other numbers. You're providing safe access to patients. They have employees. These collectives pay wages. They withhold payroll taxes. They pay workers' compensation insurance. Some of them offer employment benefits, and there are construction jobs that are created when they build out their facilities. These are all ancillary benefits of a regulated industry that are overshadowed by the tax revenue. The little big number for San Jose, the first 6 months of our program, $4.36 million were collected in taxes. but there are some other numbers. 739,000 transactions were processed. That's arguably 739,000 times that people would have bought marijuana on the black market. The city wouldn't have been able to see what they were doing, to look at the product, capture the tax, which has other benefits for the community. And there are incidents of people ordering on Craigslist or Facebook and getting robbed when the guy shows up, and that typically doesn't happen when they go to a dispensary. We conducted 325 background checks of employees. The employees make roughly $12 to $17 an hour. Minimum wage in San Jose is $10.30, so it's above minimum wage. And $1.74 million have been withheld in payroll taxes. These are employees that are paying their income tax, they're paying their Social Security tax. They're doing the things that we expect a legitimate business to do in another industry, and they're doing it here in the cannabis industry. So $291,000 have been paid in workers' compensation insurance premiums. So the insurance companies are getting their piece of the pie. About 30% of our collectives offer some kind of benefit, health, dental, vision, etc. And over 500 construction jobs were created during our build-out during that 6-month period. The collectives have reported people coming from as far away as Humboldt County, Redding, Lake Tahoe, Salinas, Fresno, and Los Angeles. We've had done 46 inspections during those 6 months. That's physical site inspections where we walk through the entire building. But that doesn't include our sales data review, because we pull all their sales data and we can review that. And we also have the video surveillance monitoring that we do remotely. But San Jose is not an island. There are other collectives with different specialties. There are cultivation, manufacturing, lab testing we heard about, distribution collectives, and the manufacturing collectives manufacture a wide range of products requiring expertise in special equipment. That's your food, that's your closed loop extraction if they choose to do it. And that could also just be like a rosin press is the ones we're seeing in San Jose because we have an approved CO2 extraction. Although that could be on the horizon depending on what the governor does. They connect farmers with manufacturers, labs, and dispensaries. They help facilitate the transfers between collectives across the state, and they are part of the emerging regulatory program under MRSA. One example of a manufacturing collective, 70 employees, they're licensed, they're part of a track and trace, they pay above minimum wage, they collect payroll taxes, insurance. These are all the things that we see in our San Jose collectives. These are just from a different jurisdiction. Another one's a distribution collective. They have 40 employees. They pay above market wages, payroll taxes, insurance, familiar, same thing. And these are some of the benefits of a regulated market over an illegal black market. You don't see those things in an illegal black market. The drug dealer on Craigslist or Facebook or Instagram isn't paying these kinds of overhead. But in order to have effective regulation, you have to address the illegal black market. We talked about administrative action. We talked about the civil process. But at the end of the day, if all you're left with is criminal investigation, then you have to do it. They are long-term, time-consuming investigations. They are resource-driven. If you're a city and you're proposing and regulating cannabis in your community, you have to put resources towards that. You have to have code enforcement, which we work with closely. You have to have law enforcement. You have to have enough people to inspect these businesses and make sure that they're remaining compliant. If you're a county, you can have your public health people in there. That would be a good thing as well. And you have to do it to maintain the integrity of the program. There's no incentive to become legitimate if you can undercut legitimate either through taxes because you're not paying your 10% or 15% or whatever the tax rate's going to be for your community. And there's no incentive that the criminal penalties aren't high. You have to do storefront investigations, delivery investigations, warehouse grow investigations, and residential grow investigations. And when you do that, you're going to find there's a lot of criminal activity beyond just cultivation and distribution of marijuana. You're going to find conspiracy, grand theft, that's the power. You're going to find a host of financial crimes, a host of fraud. And those are all things that build a case that show that an illegal business is different from a regulated business, because there are certain things that happen in the regulated business that we can see, that we can look at, that you don't see in the criminal enterprise. And to talk about the criminal enterprise is Lieutenant Larry Ryan from my department. He works in our Metro unit, and he has really experienced firsthand all of the things that I don't see in the regulated market, he sees in the criminal growth.
And that's a terrific introduction for Lieutenant Ryan. I'm going to just cue up his PowerPoint now. Computer is frozen. Just give me 1 second. That is my IT guy. There we go. No need for your help, Ed, thanks. Got it.
Hello, thank you for being here today. On behalf of Chief Garcia, welcome to San Jose and Santa Clara. What I'm going to talk to you briefly about is the indoor marijuana grow, or the black market that we experience in San Jose. And sorry about that. There we go. Is the indoor marijuana grows. And in my 26 years, we've kind of gone full circle. When I started out in the late 80s, early 90s, when we saw like crack houses, everybody saw how bad they were. They were visible. Everybody in the community knew where they were. Law enforcement knew how to address it, and we were very effective in dealing with those things. We then saw in the 90s, the pseudoephedrine extraction labs. Again, through careful legislation, we were able to deal with those. We were able to get rid of them throughout the community, and again, very effective. Well, now what we're finding are these indoor marijuana grows, and as you can see with these photos, these are houses that we did this summer. These are houses that you'll find in your neighborhood, and with the indoor grows, they want to hide in plain view is the objective. And essentially, law enforcement isn't going to find these unless we're doing a specific targeted enforcement. We're not going to find them until they burn down, and that's generally how we find them. And when they burn down, it just doesn't affect the house that burns, it affects the entire community in which this house is located. Also, when you look at the cost of rent in Silicon Valley, these houses are very expensive to rent, but that's not a concern because there's so much money that's going to be made here. So inside these houses, what you're going to find is they're going to gut the entire inside of the house, and these planks are, I don't know if you can see, but they're over 5 feet tall, and this is just one room of the house. These indoor grows will have a higher THC level to the marijuana, but they do that on purpose, and they gain more money by doing that. And that's kind of where the criminal activity is going to start. It's going to start because they have to have a controlled environment in which they can make this grow successful. In order to have a grow where you can have 5 foot tall plants in a residence, you're going to have to control the environment in which that grow is going to exist. That means that you're going to have the artificial environment, you're going to have to steal utilities to get that. So you can see some of these pictures on the wall. These are panel boxes from PG&E coming in, and they just basically do a partial bypass. So there is some registration on the meter, but most of the electricity is not being monitored by PG&E, and that's what they're going to use to run these grows. You're going to see, there's one of the photos on the top, you'll see it's an indoor grow in an apartment. They have basically an electrical cord, which is doing the bypass. It's not meant for that amount of electricity, and ultimately all of these are going to result in a fire. We had a representative from PG&E at one of our grows, and the only comment he had was the guy who did this should be dead. He shouldn't have survived this. But that is a common theme because we do see an awful lot of fires involved in these. So when they go into the grows, what they need all the power for is basically for these grow lamps. They'll have lamps, they'll have filtration, they'll have irrigation, and it takes a lot of electricity. They're going to be running from the initial start of the grow, they're going to go 18 hours a day of sunlight to 6 hours at night. That's the vegetation stage. And then as they go to the flowering stage where the buds start coming up, they're going to go to 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And they're going to do that non-stop, 24 hours a day, as long as necessary to make this grow. The electrical usage in these homes, and I'll let PG speak to that, but easily is $5,000, $10,000 a month. But they don't care because they're not paying for it. They also cause considerable damage to the residences. They'll cut holes in the walls. They'll remove, we've seen in almost every house we go to, they'll remove load-bearing walls so they can get ventilation through. They'll hang lights, they'll hang things in areas of the house that's not meant to support it. They'll wrap all the walls with Mylar, and they do that to enhance the ability of their grow. And these, I'll say, are just some examples of some of the rooms that we saw. This is an operation we did this summer where we had 2 individuals that we were able to tie to 10 different houses. And that's not uncommon in San Jose. We get reports, anonymous reports of grow houses on a weekly basis. The problem is just getting the resources to investigate those houses. And again, all these changes are done. They're enhancements to the electrical panels. They're structural changes to the residence. These are uninspected, and they're not permitted by the city. So when we look at these, you got to ask yourself, who's doing the growing? Who's benefiting from it, and who's doing it? Almost exclusively in San Jose, it's not your traditional grow where we used to see a tent, which was a 10 by 10 space, and they'd grow in the backyard. We're not seeing that anymore. These are full-scale grows. And we're basically seeing organized crime that's doing it, and predominantly Asian organized crime that's doing it. They're very sophisticated organizations, but what they do is they have the lowest player in the game. He's going to be designated as the farmer, and that person tends to the crops, and he's going to be the individual who actually tends to the crops and does the growing. Sometimes we'll see those individuals that will actually live in a little tiny space inside the house, but basically he's going to set up the house, he's going to do the wiring, he's going to tend to the watering and the fertilization of the plants, and he's going to be responsible for everything. And there's huge risks involved with this. The risk, not only the health risk because of the chemicals and the pesticides that are used, but there's mold that grows in these houses. There's the danger associated with the electrical wiring, and there's also the issue of home invasion robberies. We have an awful lot of houses that we find are victims of home invasion robberies, and they're looking for high-grade marijuana. We also find guns in these houses and other narcotics when we do these raids. One of the things that we also question is human trafficking. Sometimes these individuals who are doing the farmers and doing the growing, we question, what their motive for being involved, and are they being forced to do this? So again, on some of these houses, the amount of damage is huge that they're causing, and these groups are making tons of money. This summer, we just recently concluded a case in which we had a large criminal organization that was selling marijuana from California to Louisiana. And marijuana, a pound of marijuana here, they were selling for about $1,800 a pound. They were selling it in Louisiana for $5,000 a pound. So since probably late 2014 until we took this organization down a couple weeks ago, we conservatively estimate that $25 million worth of marijuana, tax-free, went from San Jose to Louisiana. And that's tax-free. That money is going to be laundered, and it's going to go back out onto the streets. And that's an awful lot of money. This group was very sophisticated. We did a wiretap operation in conjunction with the District Attorney's Office, the DEA, and the FBI. And it was interesting, one of the phone calls that we intercepted one night was one of the main players in San Jose talking to an individual in Louisiana, and he's giggling on the phone saying, hey, if marijuana becomes legal in December, think about how much money we're going to make. And we were thinking to ourselves, well, these guys just made $25 million. How much more do they need to make? But that's what they're thinking, and that's their mindset. How much more money are they going to make? And it's really a lot of money that's going on. As part of this group, when we took it down, we seized in cash $350,000. That's just in cash. That's not counting the bank accounts and the other accounts that we seized. So when you look at these grows, like I said, very dangerous. And again, you saw the house that I showed at the beginning. This is what's inside. The wiring is everywhere. There's ventilation. There's lights. These are not safe havens for anybody to be in. Not for our officers. Not for the community. Not for houses that are next door to them. Inside these houses, this is just the example of one of the doors, and we actually did this when we hit this house. This was the bedroom number 4. I think it says there's 48 plants in here. Three fans, 4 bowls. That's typical. But you think about if you have a 5-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom house, every single room is going to be similar to this, and every living space and common space in the house is going to be a grow. So real quick, post-grow, what happens with law enforcement is we're going to go in and we're going to seize the marijuana, we're going to take it, but what's left is an environmental mess. These lights are going to be left there, the chemicals are going to be left there, and there is a lot of pesticides that are going to be left there. Here we're just going to cut the stalks and we're going to take it and seize it, but everything else we pretty much leave. We're going to photograph it, we're going to leave in place, because we just can't take all that stuff. When you look at the chemicals, we talk about the grows outside where they're worried about contaminating water. It's the same inside with the indoor grows. These chemicals are basically just dumped down the sink, they're dumped down the toilet, they're dumped in the backyard. We go into the yard of these grows and we find hundreds and hundreds of these pesticides and chemicals that are used throughout the grow. This last one here, it's typical in almost all these grows. The bathrooms, because they're so small, they use them as their little fertilizer labs. And that's where they store everything, and anything they don't need, it gets flushed down the toilet, it gets dumped down the sink. The slide to my right, again, it's where we pull the mylar off the wall. That's mold. That's all mold inside the residence. And the reason they do that, in order to have a successful grow, they got to have a lot of humidity inside the house. And they want that carbon dioxide. One of the byproducts, though, is you're going to get carbon monoxide in the house, and you're going to get mold and spores. So for the officer safety issue, we require all the officers and first responders to wear the N95 mask, the Tyvek's clothing and protective gloves when they go into these residences. We're worried about the fungus and mold for officers breathing it in. We have had cases where officers have been injured, received injuries by result of breathing in this stuff, so it's very, very hazardous. And then I'll leave my email up, it'll be passed out, so if you have questions later for enforcement purposes, you can email me. Thank you.
So working very closely with the San Jose Police Department is our next speaker, Edward Liang. He is a deputy district attorney with the narcotics prosecution team. He works on my team, and he's done an outstanding job over the last 3 years prosecuting these cases. And he's going to give you a prosecutor's perspective on these particular investigations. He works closely with the law enforcement agencies at the inception of the investigations, helping them with drafting search warrants, consulting with them on search and seizure issues, as well as strategic planning and ultimately the takedown of the investigations so that he can take the football from there and go into court and prosecute these cases. So I'd like to turn the microphone over to Edward Liang.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I was also especially happy when Patrick came to my office and told me that I had to do this presentation. Hold on just a moment. So I work on the narcotics team, and I predominantly do marijuana cases ranging from street-level sales to medical marijuana dispensaries and outdoor grows. I work closely with Sergeant Woolsey and Lieutenant Ryan as well. And so I'm here today to talk about the prosecutor's perspective on all these cases, especially related to more urban issues, because that's what this panel is about. So here are some of the things I'm going to talk about. With respect to medical marijuana dispensaries, I'm going to talk about white-collar crimes, what Sergeant Woolsey alluded to, black market access, with respect to outdoor grows, labor trafficking, which is something that Lieutenant Ryan also touched upon with respect to indoor grows. And with respect to indoor grows, I'm talking about restitution, what happens when there's all this damage, whether it's from a marijuana cultivation or from a BHO lab exploding. And so what I'm trying to give is talk about these cases from a different lens, kind of from a different perspective, something that's not really talked about for the most part. So white-collar crime. As the saying goes, there's only 2 things that are certain in life, death and taxes. And when it comes to medical marijuana dispensaries, we see a lot of tax evasion and different types of insurance fraud or workers' compensation fraud, and which leads to money laundering and structuring, because ultimately that's what we see these medical marijuana dispensaries do. They're all about making money. It's a profit-making enterprise, despite the fact that they hide under their guise of a nonprofit organization. And this sort of approach that we've taken with respect to medical marijuana dispensaries isn't necessarily a sort of paradigm shift. It goes all the way back to Al Capone. Al Capone did the most time for not paying federal income tax. So what's helpful for these kinds of investigations is working closely with law enforcement from the get-go and working with different state agencies such as the Board of Equalization, who handles sales tax, working with the Employment Development Division, who handles insurance tax, and working with district attorney's offices where we have specialized units, at least in my office, with respect to workers' compensation fraud. And I think some other offices may have that as well. One case that I worked on with Sergeant Woolsey was a medical marijuana dispensary that was causing a lot of issues in the city of San Jose. And when we ultimately executed search warrants on the location of the dispensary as well as the home of the manager and the owner, we found something interesting. So at the dispensary itself, there were a set of receipts that were that they had in the safe, which is what they provide to the city when the city is charging them with marijuana business tax, or what they provide to the state when they're paying their sales tax. And it was a full set, and it matched the numbers that they have provided to the city and the state. But at the owner's home, we found a ledger, and in this ledger, at the bottom of it, there were notes about what they had actually reported to the city and the state. However, based upon the daily, monthly, yearly totals, they were only reporting about 1/10 of what they were actually making. So over the course of approximately 18 months or so, a conservative estimate of how much money they were profiting, just profit, was about $10 million. And eventually we found a ledger for 1 month, and it was April 2015, I believe, and they were making over $1 million a month, and just in cash. And this is a predominantly cash business, and which leads to money laundering and structuring. So for those of you who don't know what structuring is, so there are reporting requirements for banks with respect to the deposit of cash. It's anything over $10,000, they have to do a CTR, currency transaction report, and that gets reported. So by structuring, they make deposits just under $10,000 to try to avoid that reporting requirement, because obviously somebody who's depositing lots of cash, especially cash that smells like marijuana, well, obviously we all know where that comes from. And so those are the sort of crimes that we look for when it comes to investigating medical marijuana dispensaries or any other sort of marijuana-related criminal organizations, because it's moving away from talking about marijuana, whether it should be legal, whether it shouldn't be. It's about holding them accountable as we would any other business. That we wouldn't let Safeway or any other business get away with not paying the taxes that they're required to, not having workers' compensation insurance for their employees. We're holding them accountable just the same way we would hold any other business accountable. So one other aspect with respect to medical marijuana dispensaries is black market access. And this is a short video from an operation that San Jose PD did in a high crime area where they were doing undercover buys of drugs.
Hell yeah. I ain't know we don't get nothing else. Oh, okay. That's how you know. That's how I know I'm good. Right. That's how I know when I got my customers, they good. Sure. I like to smoke too. Yeah. I know my customers should be some fucking dance that love. You got some purple? That's what purple. Oh yeah, that's good shit. That's good.
So for those of you who couldn't hear it, what the drug dealer said at the beginning is that he gets marijuana from clubs, and he knows that it's weighed out for him there, and that's where he ultimately gets his supply of marijuana. He gets it from clubs, dispensaries, cooperatives, collectives. And so with respect to this particular area, and you see in the map there, this is a part of downtown San Jose, which is highly affected by narcotics or drug activity. So there's two main parks here, St. James Park and also Cesar Chavez Park. And there's this alleyway right here, between 1st and 2nd on Santa Clara. It's known as Fountain Alley. It's a high crime area, high drug crime area. And so there's a lot of street level sales, but most of the sales that they see are marijuana related, about half the sales. And they're not selling large amounts of marijuana. It's not pounds, it's buds. They're selling buds at a time, like $2 to $5. And they get it from dispensaries, and then they're redistributing out on the street to other people who either can't get a recommendation for whatever reason or just don't want to go to a dispensary, and they're selling it there. So moving on to outdoor marijuana grows with respect to labor trafficking. So whether it's indoor grows or outdoor grows, one of the things that we see are people who are very much low-hanging fruit, people who are just getting there to work, to tend to the plants there. So with respect to outdoor grows, what we're seeing is that the workers are predominantly Spanish-speaking and predominantly undocumented. And we have to make a determination a lot of times whether or not they're suspects or whether or not they're victims of human trafficking. I mean, human trafficking is more than just sex trafficking. It's labor trafficking, forcing people to work, to do things that they don't want to do. And again, it's just like with white-collar crime, it's moving beyond just talking about marijuana. It's talking about other crimes associated with marijuana cultivation, such as human trafficking. Lastly, with respect to indoor grows, one of the big things that we see is a destruction that Lieutenant Ryan has shown in those photos. and in some of the presentations from yesterday with respect to explosions at apartments, houses, things like that. And the people who are left to clean up those houses aren't the defendants in our cases. It's ultimately the homeowners, the people who rented out these places to the defendants, who obviously didn't tell them that they were going to be cultivating marijuana or having a VHO lab there. And the damage can be, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, getting money from defendants is like squeezing blood from a stone. Obviously, they don't have the money to pay for this. And when we're in court, we're the ones who hear from the retired couple who had rented out their rental property as their strategy for their retirement income, and now they have to pay for repairs. They are out of income for a year because it takes that long to basically undo all the damage that you've seen in all these photos from all these presentations. And one other aspect with the restitution that we see was with respect to the Pacific Gas Electric Company, PG&E. Obviously, there's a lot of stolen electricity, a lot of bypasses, and ultimately, that's money that needs to be paid back to PG&E for the electricity that's been used in order to cultivate marijuana. And as has been previously described, it's very, very intensive with respect to the amount of energy that they require. And we want them to pay back restitution with respect to stolen electricity, because obviously we don't want PG&E to raise our rates in order to pay for the money that they have that's stolen. So this is my contact information if you have any questions with respect to investigations that we've done and sort of strategies that we've done with the cases that we have. And one thing that I would say is we're looking at this beyond just a normal narcotics investigation. We're trying to go beyond that, looking at this more as white-collar crimes. And what we should do is work with other agencies, other state agencies. They all have investigators as well. And what we're looking for is ultimately sort of a synergy between all different investigating agencies in order to get the work together, in order to have criminal enforcement, because ultimately the criminal enforcement will lead to efficient and properly working regulatory scheme. Thank you.
Our next presenter is PG&E investigator Michael Truex. Michael Truex has been a PG&E investigator for many years, as indicated in the biography. He is a regular in terms of a witness that we will call to help secure restitution after an investigation. And so there's a variety of PG&E investigators that go to the scenes of these illegal marijuana grows. They help cut the power and render the premises safe. That's one of the roles that Investigator Truex performs in making sure that these houses that have been identified are ultimately rendered safe for law enforcement to conduct their investigation. But ultimately, that is where the work begins for Mr. Truex. After that, he does an analysis and helps to identify the amount of loss to PG&E and ultimately the consumers that have to flip the bill for the amount of loss associated with these illegal marijuana grows. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Truex.
Take a lot of my thunder with showing pictures of the grow houses. PG&E is regulated utility by the Public Utilities Commission. It's a public entity. The information that the customers have, we don't share with anybody. It's privacy issues. We have to get subpoenaed for any information we share. When the first speaker was talking about how all that stuff is on Arcata, the privacy issues are real big with PG&E. So they had to go through a lot of legal things to be able to release any information on customers. So we don't normally do that. If someone calls and asks, we're not going to give that out. So I just want to clear that up first. So what are we doing? Okay. So our main objective is to deliver safe, reliable service to our customers. We want to make sure that PG&E plays its part in ensuring the safety of the community and its PG&E employees. This is accomplished through education and training of its employees and getting the word out to the communities in which we all live and work. I mean, safety is the number one issue with PG&E, obviously. Right? Revenue assurance, that's the part I work in. Okay? We have a staff of around 35 people up and down the state. We analyze, we have investigators, analysts, billers, and we investigate energy theft. We receive tips from customers, we respond to requests from local agencies, and we use data analytics to help identify theft of energy service. So here was something that I wanted to put out there. So we talk about the lights and the hoods inside some of these places. The top of this hood is producing 129 degrees of heat. And when they're talking about some of these houses with 25, 30, 40 lights in there, you multiply it times 129 degrees, these places get really warm. So along with that, there's air conditioners, there's fans, there's filters, trying to cool these places down. What is a grow light? It uses about 1,000 watts, and with the valves tied into it, that's 1.87 kilowatts. And that's as much as a microwave oven. So think about 20 microwave ovens on for 12, 18 hours a day. A lot of wear and tear on your electrical system, and a lot of energy and a lot of heat. Again, they've gone through a lot of this. Grow lights are normally on for 12-hour cycles, alternating between the rooms. And like you said, these houses would be using 5 to 10,000 kilowatts. We kind of estimated 2,500 to 3,500, depending on the number of lights. The larger ones could get up a little bit higher. But a normal house, this is what they would use if they weren't stealing. So what happens when services are overloaded? Because that's what we're basically responding to. PG&E, whatever you guys use in your house is what you use. What we're concerned about is the safety of it, okay? So we're looking at overloaded services, overloaded meters, panels, things like that. So in this picture, pretty incredible to catch this as we're driving up, and this is an overloaded warehouse out in one of our East Bay cities, and you can see the lines actually catching fire, going in, just bursting into flames. It takes a lot of energy to do that. And when they're not paying for the energy, it's a lot of money that PG&E is losing also. This is a safety issue. How about underground? Well, we can see the insulation is burning off of the underground services. If these services end up touching each other, you're going to have phase-to-phase, and you're going to have an explosion. Okay? Again, we want to take care of this before it gets this far. Okay, here's a few house that has some overloaded services. This is inside the garage, on fire at the bypass. Meter's fine, everything looks good. Their normal usage is like everybody else in the neighborhood, but the bypass takes the energy out to the different rooms to give free energy for the grows. Another overloaded panel. This is a pretty nice area sitting off the golf course, and if you looked at the house itself, you would see that nothing stands out about this house, just a regular house. Inside, another house, what they'll do is they'll cut into the conduit inside the house and put some taps on our service and take it somewhere else, but again, it overloads. They'll start out with a small amount, but as they make more money, they get greedy, they add more and more load, and then the equipment they initially hooked up to steal the power can't handle it, and that's where we end up getting the fires. Another one of our houses that we're looking at, this thing just burst into flames. There's only so much power that these services can handle, and what they're doing is they're taking residential houses and turn them into commercial operations. There's another one in the garage. Not even a large one. Just the wiring couldn't handle it. They'll use dissimilar metals. They might use copper. We'll have aluminum service. They'll use copper connectors, or we'll have copper and they'll use aluminum. And dissimilar metals will heat up a lot faster, and that'll cause a problem. This one, our first responder out there thought that there was a bypass because of on the bottom you can see some copper in there. That was actually the meter just melted right and just fell out of the service. That was from the meter. And some of these are meter grows and some of these are bypasses. And it's crazy what you see out there. And then, like we were saying earlier, it's not the house that caught on fire that was stealing, but now his neighbor's affected. Other neighbors are affected. These people don't have a place to spend the night. They're away from their house for a while. And so PG's road insurance team, we go over 1,000 cases a year that we investigate. Our leads come from everywhere. And again, we can't share what we find with local law enforcement. They have to come to us on stuff because all we want to do is we want to make sure that the service is safe. And we'll talk to our customers who will come back to it because they want to get their power back on. Not every place burns down. And we'll have them work with service planning in the city to upgrade their services, upgrade their wiring, get everything done correct. They get back on, they continue with their operation, they pay PG back what they owe us. And that's the bottom line, is to do that. And we get them to move their load to nighttime. So we reduce the possible power outages during the daytime when all our businesses are running. So after we confirm the unsafe overload condition, we cut it and clear and make it safe. Okay? Sometimes they talk to us, sometimes they don't. We'll make every effort to work with the responsible party to correct the unsafe condition, and we'll issue retro bills after the investigation is complete. We'll talk with the customers, and once they know that we can't share their information unless someone asks us, they're pretty upfront about what they're doing, how long they've been doing it, and they want to make good with it because they're still going to make a tremendous profit off what they're doing. We just want them to pay for the energy and do it safely. The profit is there. There's a lot of money in that. So that takes care of my PowerPoint. I was taking a few notes when the others were talking. We talked about the privacy issues. Training-wise, we'll get out in the public and we'll do training presentations for communities, talking about the overload systems and stuff like that, what to kind of look for when you live in a neighborhood, numbers they can contact us at when they suspect maybe one of their neighbors is doing anything. We've really become more proactive. We used to be reactive. The only time we responded to marijuana grows when law enforcement called us. After they've cleared the residents, they'll call us to identify the bypass, to give them an estimate how much PG is lost. But with the education we're getting out to people, our employees are calling us more often on transformers to go out, power outages in neighborhoods, because something's causing that power to go out. There's an overload system somewhere, so they'll tell us a transformer, and then we'll pull all the meters off that transformer and start looking at the houses individually and seeing which one maybe could be causing this, and then go from there. And then we're not allowed to go to residents until after the law enforcement clears it, and then we'll go in and do our stuff. So we're pretty well regulated through PG&E and the piece, what we can and cannot do. We want to work and just make sure everything's safe out there. Our employees are going out there and they get caught in a trap too. So like we tailboard with them like monthly. Every time we find something, we share it with our people that are out there on the field, because they need to see what's going on out there. And it's opened my eyes. I was in San Jose for 10 years doing the investigating down in the East Bay. And the first 10 years in San Jose, the only time we ever responded was when law enforcement called us. And it was kind of eye-opening, but then getting into the East Bay, it's just, it's crazy. It's shot up so much. We went from probably respond to maybe 100 to 150 to we're responding to over 1,000 a year. So it's a growing industry, and there's a lot of money to be made. And again, with PG&E, we just want to make sure it's safe and making sure our communities are safe.
We have about 4 minutes.
4 minutes total for the panel?
Be done.
Okay, perfect. We have quite a few questions, obviously, and I'm going to try to get through as many as we can. Many of you have fortunately directed the questions to particular panelists. So, Lieutenant Ryan, this question's for you. Has there been a decline in illegal grows since 2014, so since the implementation of San Jose's regulation on dispensaries?
I don't think we have a way to measure that. If anything, there's been an increase because we've been alerted to more. A lot of calls come in non-citizens in the community, but I think it's been pretty much steady. We haven't seen a tremendous decrease at all.
Sergeant Woolsey, So are you suggesting that a well-regulated and well-policed legal market is positive as compared to other options?
It can be. Yeah, I think it can be. I see things through a different lens than most of my colleagues in law enforcement because I'm actually working with the collectives and looking at what they're doing. The possibility is there that you have to have reasonable regulation and you have to have the resources to follow through and back it up. And you have to address the illegal market because if you don't, there's no incentive to become legitimate, so to speak, and operate like a regular business. And when you look at either you're going to pass your own laws or you look at AMA, you have to look at things like, is the tax rate too high? Are my regulations too overbearing? Because if you do, you'll drive people into the black market as opposed to driving them out of it.
Next question, and I think this is probably for the city of San Jose. How much of the $29 million in revenue goes towards education to prevent adolescent use of marijuana?
I don't know if this is on. We don't have, it is, okay. We don't have a specification on where our money goes, our tax money. So in San Jose, the collectives pay an operating fee, an annual operating fee, and that's a cost recovery. So they pay for my salary, they pay for city attorneys, they pay for code enforcement, and so on. And then the 10% tax, the $29 million, that's all general fund money. So council decides where to put that. They can put it towards roads, they can put it to programs, they can put it to whatever use they want. In other communities, they do less cost recovery fees, and they'll specify 10% of my tax goes to schools, 10% of my tax goes to whatever. That's up to the community to decide.
I'll just put this out to any panelist, and if no one wants to answer this question, we'll move on. It looks like under Prop 64, marijuana cultivation, sale, and transportation will become a misdemeanor, 6-month maximum. That doesn't seem like any type of a deterrent to illegal grows. Why would somebody in Trinity or Humboldt County pay a tax to grow legally? It used to be a felony, now it's potentially a misdemeanor, analogous to disorderly conduct. Anybody want to field that question?
Yeah, that's a real problem.
I would say that's a good question.
League of California Cities representative, this is for you, Mr. Cromartie, mentioned that the small contained individual grows allowed under Prop 64 will make it difficult to keep out of used hands per what has been seen in Colorado. Please explain.
Well, if you have indoor cultivation going, and it's going to be difficult to regulate, let's be realistic. I mean, cities are probably, most of them are probably not going to try to do quote-unquote reasonable regulation, whatever that means, because it's going to involve going into people's houses, and you've seen what some of it can look like just now.
Can you get the mic? Put it closer to your mouth.
Right on top of it. I'll just try to project. Be honest. If everyone in this room is allowed to cultivate at home, probably it's safe to say half the people in this room have children. How are you going to keep it away from your kids, especially if you're doing more than the 6 plants that are legally allowed? I mean, it's virtually impossible. And when you combine that with what will clearly be an increase in the availability of edibles, which are the products that are most attractive to youth, it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
I'm going to pose this last question. This is one of the actually first questions that came in, and it was just sitting here. This is to the city of San Jose as well. What is being done today to close down illegal dispensaries?
That's a good question. So we have civil action against all of our illegal storefronts that we know about. We know that there are a lot of illegal delivery services that are out there that will be addressed in the same way, and we do criminal investigations on them, but like I said, they are long-term, resource-driven investigations, and if you're going to do a regulated program, you have to throw resources at it. You can't just say, I want tax money, and then not put that tax money into enforcement.
Okay, I want to thank this panel. This was an excellent panel.